So, welcome everybody to a solo episode of the Apostates. Solo for now. I don't know for sure if and when anybody's going to join me, but certainly a lot of things to talk about. We've been off for quite a while. Most of that was circumstantial for some of the people who are part of the show. Tax season is really difficult and busy, so we can no longer make Tuesdays a thing anymore. So because Tuesdays weren't really a thing anymore, it became very difficult to settle on a new day, and then technical difficulties, and then all sorts of things. So if nobody's able to join me for today, I'm going to make a go of it for a little while and talk about a few things. But if someone is, eventually we'll probably do the whole episode. So for now, I am. This is probably the first episode I'm doing where there's still daylight left. If I can, look at that. There's oh, that was a mistake. So I think one of the big things that I want to talk about is, as I sit here in front of my, as every week, in front of my partially dismantled Hoosier cabinet, is child labor, or most the issue with Arkansas and their new rule on child labor, which short version of it is they eliminated a layer of security, a layer of permitting, a layer of regulation that allows children younger than 16 to work without approval from the state. And what Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the mouthpiece of Arkansas, its governor and the sort of champion of this legislation, even though she didn't write it, but all the same, is she saying that a lot of people are misinterpreting it and misrepresenting what it is and saying it doesn't make kids less safe. All the laws against child labor and exploitation are still in the books. The issue is that when you eliminate that layer of regulation, if the state doesn't know which child, who, how many, where are working, these children are considerably less safe and more open for exploitation. Especially because a lot of these children are going to be undocumented children. These are children who are going to be exploited, much more likely to be exploited. Not every child under 14 is going to be exploited. You'll see, 14-year-olds who are working at the McDonald's and things like that sort. But a lot of what's going to happen is you're going to get children who are working dangerous farm jobs, dangerous manufacturing jobs, dangerous agricultural jobs, things that could get them severely hurt, severely injured. And because the state has a lot less control, a lot less of an ability to say, no, this kid can't work this job, or the state doesn't have an ability to know which kids are working where, these kids are a lot more ripe for exploitation, and that is the issue. So there's a gigantic level of hypocrisy when it comes to these people using children as this sort of force to say, we are here for protecting children. We want to protect them from having to know that drag exists. That's their big thing. Of course, they've been on this for a while. Tennessee, of course, banning drag events from public square. Tennessee, of course, one of the states that has, I think, up to 20, maybe 13, 14, 15 Hooters locations. Kids are perfectly fine to be allowed there. What are these places called? Restaurants? Kids are definitely allowed to be exposed to sexualization if it is, for example, heterosexual section. Meanwhile, drag is inherently sexual. A drag queen just reading a book to a child is not sexual. These are people who are putting on a performance of femininity. But if your mind sees that as inherently sexual, that is a problem with you and your issues with femininity in general. That is not an issue with drag queens who are dressed up in colorful attire reading books to children. There is nothing about that is inherently sexual, but they want to say that it is inherently sexual. Meanwhile, they're perfectly fine allowing children. One lawmaker, I believe in Texas it was saying that he thinks that children should be going to Hooters. Like, specifically mentioned it, thinking it helps the case, I guess, that Hooters is a great place to bring children. Of course, you're talking about definitely bringing kids to an environment that is built on sexualization. Sex is selling in that specific circumstance. So that's what they do. They're perfectly fine with sexualization as long as it is the sexualization of their choice. And anything that is outside the norms of what they consider the 1950s era normal society, when there was no such thing as gay people who lived in public life or trans people who lived in public life. They existed. They just, weren't allowed to be around because it was criminalized. They love that world. And so anything that exists outside of that world is inherently something that they need to protect children from. But they don't want to protect them from getting their hand crushed in farming equipment at the age of 14. They don't want to protect them from what the number one killer, I believe, of children in this country is gun violence. Definitely don't want to protect them from that. They would rather children have open... I'm sorry, I completely messed that up. They would rather children have a closed casket funeral after a school shooting than for the child to know that drag exists, or that one of their classmates might have, or one of their teachers might have two parents of the same gender. They would rather the child have a closed casket funeral than that. Because really, it's about keeping the order of their world and the world they want exactly the same. So that is why they want it to be easier for people to exploit children who are working, because that brings the world back where people had to suffer to earn their way, where, the only real way to get ahead in this world, the right way, is to build character, and you build character by suffering. That's why this push against empathy and wokeness, as Governor DeSantis is using as a cudgel. They don't want silly things like empathy being taught to kids, because empathy is just a gateway to, I don't know, not wanting to oppress people, I guess. It's hard. It's hard to really say how much of them are true believers and how much of them are riding this wave. But either way, it's equally as destructive. You have in West Virginia, they just passed... Excuse me for rubbing my nose constantly, by the way. I'm having an allergic reaction kind of day. This cannot be appealing to look at. My apologies. I'm having some severe allergic issues. Great timing, because this wasn't a problem before I got on camera. But anyway, West Virginia finally passed a child marriage ban that bans all marriage under the age of 16. Previously in West Virginia, you could get married under the age of 16 with special waivers. Now that is completely done away with. However, before this passed, what was previously shot down was a ban for marriage under the age of 18. And you've got a couple of lawmakers talking about how they themselves or their parents got married at 17. And that's fine. It's always about the exceptions. And yeah, that exception was great. My grandparents were high school sweethearts, and as much as it was a different time, there is... I can get behind the idea that, you want to ban marriages under the age of 16 through 18. You want to have, as the law has, a rule that they can't be more than 4 years in age. At least that's more reasonable than wanting to completely torpedo a ban at the age of 18 entirely, so you can keep having children under the age of 16 getting married, because there were instances where and two were cited, I believe, where someone, I believe, who was 16 was married to a 40-year-old. I would call that rape. Or someone who was 16 was married to a 49-year-old. I would call that rape. But whatever. They're not interested in protecting kids from anything other than lifestyles that they don't think should be seen, because they exist outside of that norm of 1950s oppression that they want to live in. So they're not interested in protecting kids from child labor. They're not interested in protecting kids from getting shot to death in school. And they're not interested in protecting kids from exploitation and rape, from marriages to people who are abusing their positions and authority against them. I mean, you had, I can't remember what state it was recently, this pastor who was 29, thereabouts, finally married his sweetheart as she turned 18. I'm sure nothing happened between them before she turned 18. But that's just how it is. As long as things are heterosexual and in that lane, they really don't care about the children. The children are used as a device to oppress others. Texas, a man just filed a lawsuit against 3 women who helped his ex-wife obtain abortion pills in Texas, so that she could abort the fetus of what could have been their child. But, interesting to notice, it wasn't a child, it was a fetus. I've got just a little illustration I want to have for you. This is an empty soda can. Starry. This is the brand, I guess, Pepsi, maybe? I don't know. Starry. It's a soda can. This is larger than a fetus, of generally about the age when most abortions happen. And it also has a similar level of viability and sentience, because a fetus is not a child. A fetus is a fetus. But that doesn't matter to Texas, of course. Now that the laws are the way they are, people can sue their ex-partners for not giving birth, and essentially makes them a class of basically birthing slaves, to basically be forced to carry a baby that they don't want to carry under penalty of criminal and civil law. So it's never really about the children, because that when that child grows up, they will not protect that child from gun violence. They will not protect that child from getting its hand mangled or his foot crushed in farming equipment. They will not protect that child from being groomed and exploited by an adult into child marriage. The real grooming, by the way, that's what grooming is. Speaking of which, so when you hear the term grooming coming from these people, it doesn't really mean anything. So that's where that comes from. That is their interest in children, is using them only as a tool to make sure that they can force people out of public life. You see that guy, Michael Noel, whatever his name is, from the Daily Wire. And I tend to bring up the Daily Wire a lot. Not, they may not be the most prominent. They're not Fox's, they're not Fox News level audiences, but all the same, they have a user base that is, I believe, nearly 1 million paying subscribers. And then, those people will share little clips and viewpoints on and on and on. Their prominence and the amount that they focus on this issue of LGBTQ people and calling them groomers and trying to prevent them from even being teachers or being in public life is having an effect. And you've seen it occur in states like Tennessee, in states like Florida. It is happening. This influence of these people is really making life harder and harder for people who are LGBTQ. So it's worth paying attention to them in that regard. And I think there's a lot of people who would say that, for one's mental health, it's not good to focus on them. I agree. If it's really bad for your mental health, don't subject yourself to it. But all the same, they do have influence, and not paying attention to them is not going to make it go away. So if you can stand to pay attention to them, I would do yourself a favor and make sure you're educated, well-read on the subjects, keeping on top of the latest talking points that they're pushing, because those make their way in the ecosystem up the chain to Fox News, to politicians who create these laws that then get passed in states like Florida and Tennessee and Oklahoma as well. Oklahoma, of course, Also, Oklahoma, Idaho, North Dakota. So I've lost track of these states that are banning gender affirming healthcare for minors under the guise of protecting children. And they lie to you about what they're protecting them from. They will say that they're protecting children from, having all these, you know, doing irreversible damage to them. And of course, no study has ever found that there's damage from puberty blockers. And of course, they give puberty blockers to non-transgender children for other health issues. The effects are reversible. There's nothing that has been found that puberty blockers have caused any long-term effects. They say it hasn't been studied for a very long time, decades. It's been studied for decades. Aside from that, even so, nothing is without risk. Absolutely nothing. They will say they want to prevent small children, from undergoing. They say, trans men will. Of course, they won't acknowledge that they're men, but they'll call it, But they'll say trans men getting double mastectomies, is irreversible, whatever they call it. The thing is, prepubescent people can't get double mastectomies because they don't have breasts to have double mastectomies in the first place. And after puberty, there are people who are not trans who get double mastectomies because they do not like their breasts. That has happened. You've seen it. There's formerly a child actor, now an adult, on a famous sitcom, had a double mastectomy. Sorry, I keep saying double mastectomy. I meant breast reduction. Surgery, basically just surgery on breasts in general, whether it's breast reduction or double mastectomies. These are things that people do for all sorts of reasons, not just being transgender. And they're not talking about stopping a 16-year-old cisgender girl who does not like how large her breasts are from getting breast reduction surgery. No, they're only focused on transgender children because transgender people are the ones they want to oppress in the first place. Not to say they don't also want to oppress women in general. It's a whole thing. But right now their focus is on transgender children, transgender people too. Because again, they've got enough people on board to say, all right, let's get a lot of laws passed to protect trans children from being influenced to being trans. And now they're starting to say the part that was formerly quiet out loud, that they want to ban transgender people or transgenderism from public life. That's a distinction Michael Knowles wants to give, to say, I'm not saying I want to ban transgender people. I want to ban the ideology of transgenderism from public life. I'm wondering if he would ever say he wants to ban Judaism from public life as opposed to Jewish people, but we'll see. That's just it. The use of children is always a fake. It is a fraud. At least, coming from me. Not to say that there are people who don't actually care about children, but when they talk about caring for children, they're not talking about caring for children. Because if they really cared about children, they would talk about making sure we had universal pre-K. They would make sure that we would keep programs like, food assistance easy to access. They would make sure that what they like to call entitlement programs were fully robust, and they constantly are seeking cuts for them because they don't like children. They don't care about children. Children are a tool to them, but only a tool. Otherwise, they're just closed casket funerals after a short school shooting. That's all it is. That's all it's ever been for them. Because you go back to the transgender children idea, and they talk so much about the irreversibility of these things that are totally reversible. Then they go on to talk about the surgeries that you really cannot get until you're an adult. And even so, even on the rare occasion that people under 18, people who are 17, do get these surgeries, it is with an extreme amount of medical and psychological vetting. And the way to prevent people from regretting these things in the future is not to take away medical access. It is to allow more robust medical infrastructure. Right now, they like to talk about the supposed regret, and they'd like to talk about the few handful of detransitioners there are out there. There are detransitioners. I mean, just statistically, it does happen. Rarely does it happen. We are talking approximately 1%. And of that 1%, most of those people who do transition do so for social and economic reasons, not because they regret transitioning itself, but because life has become difficult because of outside forces for them. They cannot afford to continue transitioning. Many of those who detransition go back and retransition in the future when they are in a better place too. So of that small handful, that transitioned and legitimately regretted it, they are a much smaller percentage than the people who regret getting things such as knee surgery and hip surgery. The amount is so incredibly small, it does not justify preventing everybody who needs to transition from doing so, because there are plenty of other irreversible surgeries that occur to non-transgender people that people do regret in the future. They do of many sides. Again, not only is it hip replacements and knee replacements, it's all sorts of surgeries that grown adults who can consent, can give informed consent to, eventually regret. So they say, all right, we'll prevent kids. Like you're talking about the smallest number of the smallest number of the smallest number of people who are below 18 who even do this in the first place. They want to cancel an entire class of people under the guise of protecting children, because really their goal is not children, the goal is everybody. The goal is everybody who is transgender. In just much the same way as they're saying they want to keep kids safe from indoctrination in school, because a teacher might have a picture on their desk of their spouse who is the same gender as them, and that counts as indoctrination. Never mind that everything everywhere is, heterosexual opposite sex couples, and that's not indoctrination to them. Not TV shows, not commercials of any kind where there's a husband and there's a wife. That is not indoctrination to them, because that is the normal that they see and the normal that they want. That's the 1950s to them. So it's basically it. The guise of protecting children for them is always a sham, because if they really cared, they would have done something to stop school shootings long ago, and they wouldn't be fighting so hard to make sure that the ban on child marriage is as little restrictive as possible, and they wouldn't be trying to make it easier for companies to hire 14 and 15-year-olds to dangerous jobs that could hurt them. So that's really about it for today. Since I don't have any co-hosts, I'm surprised I even went this long and probably reiterated way too much to myself over and over again. But I mean, that's just it. We're going to get back on track sooner or later, and we're going to have, the whole gang back together. This has just been a tough time of year. This is the first. I mean, the show just started in November. We're still working everything out, and unfortunately, tax season is really tough on a couple of us, and it makes scheduling a show with multiple people very, very difficult. So, so that's that. When we come back, we're going to talk about a lot of more pressing current events. I really want to talk about Tucker Carlson and his hypocrisy. I know it's like shooting fish in a barrel, but it's fun. I mean, the guy straight up called Trump a demonic force that he hates, and yet goes on the air talking about how much the left has an irrational hatred of Donald Trump that colors their entire ideology. Like, sure, Tucky. Sure. So that's the kind of stuff that we'll get to, but a lot more current event stuff. I mean, we definitely want to talk more about, the goings on in the sort of burgeoning presidential primary and things like that. So we'll get to fun stuff like that, and it'll be a lot more fun than just me rambling for 20 minutes. I am supremely sorry if any of you actually had to sit down and watch this. You didn't have to. It was probably only one of you for this episode, because it's just me. I mean, who would watch this? But we'll be back, and we are going to have the whole fun gang because I realize I am the least entertaining member of this posse. So it can't. It really, this is unsustainable. Just me here, constantly itching my nose from allergies and drinking this glass of water. You might think I've got a problem like Don Jr. I don't. I don't. So just remember, whenever they say it's for the children, it's a lie. So that'll be that. We'll be back probably next week. And just one last thing. It looks like Henry Kissinger's still not dead. What the hell? I mean, for crying out loud, we're about to lose